toxic traits, now worth the wait. Hey, wake up and realize I wasted so much time. I picked up pieces even though it can't be fixed. It can be fixed. Should have left you from the start. I'm feeling low, weak.